I can think of no one better to start the newest season of The Hidden Economics of Remarkable Women than Christiana Figueres. Most famously, Christiana Figueres served as the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. In 2015, she led the process that secured the historic Paris Agreement on climate change, where 195 nations agreed to limit future global warming. Today, Christiana Figueres spends her time running a nonprofit called Global Optimism, which she launched with her fellow Paris negotiator. And they have great podcasts, Outrage and Optimism, where they get to be undiplomatic about the climate crisis. This makes her the perfect person to talk to about the current state of the climate movement and the vital role women play in protecting our planet. Here's my conversation with Christiana Figueres. And I want to really start that the world is very different from what it was in 2015 when you led negotiations to get the Paris Climate Agreement. What do you think the environmental movement needs to focus on right now, given that the US administration recently withdrew from all UN climate institutions?
The first thing I would say is not give up. That's really important for us to understand that no matter what, we are on the right side of history. We're on the right side of justice. We're on the right side, actually, of all market signals. And that there is this very odd, to put it diplomatically, administration right now in the United States that will be there for another 3 years that is motivated by everything other than health, fairness, sustainability, continuity, life. They're just motivated by short-term profit for some. Short-term profit for some. That is not going to last.
Are you watching a climate, or rather, are you watching climate become primary in economic competition rather than a cooperative project? And what role can multilateralism actually play at this moment?
Very interesting way to put it, Zainab. Yes, I do think that we are now increasingly, and perhaps even more vigorously in the next 2 years, in a space in which climate action, or let's call it decarbonizing our economies, decarbonizing our economies is becoming more and more the foundation for competitiveness, the foundation for more market penetration, the foundation for more efficiency, for better performance, and definitely for increasing market demand. That's a good thing. Because I would say 10 years ago, Zainab, it was definitely all about multilateral collaboration. When we were finishing the negotiation for the Paris Agreement, it was about collaboration among countries above all. And 10 years later, the technologies that are the solutions, especially the renewable energy technology, but increasing also transport technologies, all those clean technologies have become so much more competitive, so much more reliable, so much more efficient, so much less maintenance, that they're just way more competitive than the incumbent fossil fuels. And so that being the case, we have a very interesting reversal where 10 years ago, the pull was political and the push was economic. Today, that has changed. Today, the pull is economic and the push can be political with a small p. Because as Mark Carney, PM of Canada, so eloquently said in Davos, we're at the point in which multilateralism and global cooperation, as we knew it, is no longer on the table. And so collaboration now needs to be written with a smaller c, in the sense that, as he has described, it is now up to middle powers, smaller countries, subnationals, subnational governments, industry, corporations themselves, to actually come together around a shared goal, an aspirational outcome that they're all interested in, and then make smaller, much more targeted alliances, and not expect the entire world to come together unanimously like we did in Paris in 2015. So the disadvantage of that, Zainab, is of course that you can say, well, but if there's not unanimous support, maybe it doesn't have the legitimacy that it does. Okay, yes, I agree. I take that. I swallow that. The advantage is that you don't have to negotiate down to a minimum common denominator. The fact that you are already seeing small alliances come together around issues that are of common interest, around stopping deforestation, about decreasing even further the cost of renewables. That means that those smaller alliances can move to a maximum level of delivery much quicker, because they're not constantly negotiating with those who are not interested in collaborating. So there's advantages and disadvantages.
I'd like to take us back in the past for a bit. In 2010, you were appointed to be the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You were holding your first press conference, and your comments took your team, and I would say reading your book, you, by surprise. Can you tell me about the day and how it shaped you?
Yeah, that was definitely a memorable day. As you say, Zainab, it was my first press conference as a newly minted executive secretary. And I will take you back to, remember, this was June 2010. And most of the climate community were barely coming out and surviving the Copenhagen catastrophe. I call myself a Copenhagen survivor. I think there's thousands of people who would go, yeah, me too, I'm a Copenhagen survivor. It just marked us so deeply. And we were in mourning, and in mourning with M-O-U, not M-O-R. We were in mourning for such a long time. And the global mood was just doom and gloom. Nobody wanted to talk to each other. Everybody was blaming someone else. The presidency was blaming the secretariat. The secretariat was blaming parties. On and on and on. And I mean, the carousel of blaming was going on around and around. And in particular, no one really wanted to come back to the table. Because they were so angry with each other, but also because they just said, okay, that was it. Because it had been set up to be the moment in which we would get to a global agreement. Copenhagen, as a hosting city, informally, not formally, but informally changed its name to Copenhagen for months. And we were all going to Copenhagen in such hope that we would be able to forge a global agreement. And since that was not just not the case, but it was so chaotic, it was such a disaster from a procedural point of view, from a political point of view, that we were, in the trash can. And so at that first press conference, coming straight out of all of this, some journalist said, so, Ms. Figueres, do you think a global agreement will ever be possible? To which, without even engaging my brain, I heard my voice go like, not in my lifetime. And when I heard myself say that, Zainab, I was so upset, because I knew what the consequences of that would be. I was in my early 60s at the time, and 10 years ago, and I thought, wow, I could live another 30, 40 years. If in those 30 or 40 years, we do not get a global agreement, what is the consequence of that going to be? And I thought to myself, Christiana, are you completely crazy? Are you out of your mind? There's no way that we cannot get to the point where we have agreed guardrails for the decarbonization of the global economy, because the price just on human life is too huge. The price on misery even if many of them don't lose their lives. The price on biodiversity is too huge. The price on infrastructure, on and on and on. The cost is just unacceptable. So I walked back to my office with this knot in my stomach, and I went, right, this has got to change. And so in my good training, I realized the first one that has to change her attitude is myself, because I cannot expect anyone else to change their attitude if I haven't changed my attitude. So I did a lot of internal work first before opening up my mouth again. I did a lot of work on myself until I could find it in myself to both face the despair that everybody was facing. And I think not in my lifetime is something that thousands of people would have said had they been asked the same question. But I did a lot of work to face that despair, which was not just for me, but thousands of other people. And at the same time, realize that despair cannot paralyze me or anyone else. We have to rise out of those ashes, gather whatever strength we can, continue to gather more strength, more actors, more work, and figure out a way forward, because the opposite is completely unacceptable. As responsible adults, as responsible human beings, as ancestors, you and I, Zainab, whether we have children or not, we're already ancestors. Everyone who is alive right now is an ancestor to future generations. And that is just such an irresponsible attitude of answers to just go, well, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, so what? No, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that.
Now, last December was the 10 years anniversary of the Paris Climate Agreement. And on your podcast, you were very emotional as you were reflecting about it. Take us back to what were you thinking? Why the emotions? What happened to the Paris Agreement since then? What it has accomplished and what is left to do?
Well, over 10 years, there actually are a lot of good things that have happened. But let me, just start with the I wouldn't even call it despair. I would call the disappointment, the deep disappointment. The deep disappointment, especially about what has happened in the United States, being such a large economy, being such a large polluter. The fact that the fossil fuel industry has basically taken over the White House, and that everything that comes out of the White House and of the rest of the administration is now there in order to serve the interests of fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry, and of the top 1% of people in the United States. So to govern for one particular completely polluting industry and for the benefit of very rich people is something that is just a dagger in my heart. Not just because of climate, just because of the injustice of it, just because of the immorality of it, just because really that is what a state is doing. The purpose of a state is actually to protect its citizens, not to protect, a couple of trillionaires or billionaires. It's just so appalling. So that is the piece that is very unsettling for me. Having said that, Zainab, the fact that we are now, as I said before, in a situation in which the economics is the fundamental argument for all of these technologies to continue to move forward, to continue to drop their prices, to continue to become more and more efficient, is actually an amazing scenario that we're in. Thank heavens we're there at the same time that we're in the political nightmare of the United States. So, both of those things are actually occurring at the same time. Thank heavens. If this political nightmare in the United States had happened 2 years ago, we would not have the strength of the market with us. It's happening now at the point in which the market forces are with us. So that is a huge mitigating factor to the political nightmare in the United States. And the fact that we have now so much more attribution science, we understand so much better than we did 10 years ago exactly what is the impact of increasing temperature on natural disasters. We have much better understanding of what is the infrastructure loss that is being lost. We have a much better understanding of human health impacts. We have a much better understanding. All of the sciences have advanced incredibly over 10 years so that we really have a much better handle on what is the price that we will continue to pay should we not act in a timely fashion. At the same time, we also have so much more possibilities because of the technologies that continue to develop. And as I said before, recently the understanding that maybe we don't need all players in the field. Maybe we can just play with those who want to play.
Now, I want to go back to your book, The Future We Chose, The Stubborn Optimist Guide to the Climate Crisis. You wrote it with your deputy negotiator, Tom Rivett-Carnac. And at one point, you write a quote that says, "We realized that the perpetuation of our species was about far more than saving ourselves from extreme weather. It was about being good stewards of the land and of one another." Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that goes back to the concept of ancestors that I was mentioning before, Zainab, to understand that, yes, we all have ancestors who are the people who have gone before us. Um, and to understand that there is continuity on this planet, that there are generations that are already coming up in the world and generations unborn, and that we have a responsibility to both look back to the ancestors from whom we have inherited a really difficult situation, but also we have the responsibility to look forward to those generations that are very young right now that will be alive at the turn of the century, which is the marker for by then will we have addressed climate change, so they will be alive. This is no longer theory. I have a 1-year-old grandson. He will likely, perhaps, but likely be alive in the year 2100. And that is the marker. Everything that is being done on climate, all the modeling, et cetera, is pinned on that year. That is no longer a theoretical year. That is the year of children being born right now. That is our responsibility. That is our direct responsibility to think of these children that are being born right now that have no voice at the decision table whatsoever. And we have to be their voice.
Well, talking about species, just today in the news, there was a report about the impact of Costa Rica's policies of protecting from deforestations and tree planting and biodiversity, addressing biodiversity. It was so exciting that the scientists started actually tracking all the different species that are returning to the forest. I want to talk more about, because you recommend in your book plant trees, plant trees. I want to go more than planting the trees because you mentioned biodiversity protections. Tell us more about what's called nature-based solutions. What do you feel about that? What's the importance of this in this moment? And how do you feel even about the news in Costa Rica that is possible to track positive news in here?
Well, I must say, with a broken heart, Zainab, that those policies that have allowed Costa Rica to be a real model country, because we do protect our nature and have been doing so for decades, no matter which political party was in power, those policies are being seriously threatened by the current government and by the government that has just been elected a few weeks ago. And that really breaks our heart because it is such a short-sighted view of what Costa Rica can continue to do. There is a little bit of a contagion going on between the United States and Costa Rica. So that is of huge concern to us. So let's see, the new government takes over on the 8th of May. Currently, we are very concerned about what they might do. But one thing is what people say in the political campaign, and another thing is what actually happens. So let's see what happens. But having made my comment of concern, what is very unique about Costa Rica is that we have been protecting our biodiversity, as I say, for decades, ever since 1970s. We have been protecting our biodiversity because we don't have any minerals, we don't have any metals, we don't have any fossil fuels. The only richness that we have, and I put only in quotation marks because I think we're incredibly blessed, is biodiversity, what grows on our soils. And 25% of our territory is protected national parks. We have 5% of the biodiversity of the world here. And because we don't have any fossil fuels, even last century, we never exploited fossil fuels. So all our electricity is clean from hydro, from wind, from geothermal. So we are an astonishing little exception, I would say, to most trends and trajectories that you see in other countries. And we did it, yes, in part because we love nature, but also in part because peeling away all the romanticism, nature is our best income. It's the basis of our economy. We are a population of 5 million people. 2 million tourists per year come to Costa Rica to see nature. That's why they come. We are one of the top destinations of ecotourism in the world. So frankly, if we want to depend on our national income, it's nature. And that's why we protect it. It's our piggy bank, pure and simple. It happens to be that, lucky us, our piggy bank are basically our flora and fauna. We are very lucky to have that. Other people have a piggy bank of fossil fuels, oil and gas or coal, whatever. Our piggy bank is our flora and fauna, which is an incredible blessing. But we're aware, in addition to loving the flora and fauna, we are aware that it's our piggy bank. And hence, we protect it. We totally protect it, because otherwise, why would people come to Costa Rica when that is our one and only attraction? In addition, I must say, to the fact that we are a nation without an army, and that gives us a very interesting glow in a world that is still ripped apart by wars.
Well, and your family had a particular legacy in creating that. Your father was 3 times president who did enact the no army policy. Your brother was a president. Your mother was an ambassador and legislator. And I'm really sorry that I heard she recently passed away. And you have 2 adult daughters. How did your family influence your life's work?
Oh, a lot. Definitely a lot. As you say, I come from a deeply political family, and so political campaigns are as frequent as breakfast. And we did travel as children with my parents to every single corner of the country on their political campaigns. On one of these political campaigns, I accompanied my parents to a national park in Costa Rica that is called Monteverde. And I was treated to the most beautiful showing of nature, which is the mating season of a species called the golden toad, which only existed in that rainforest. And it was just absolutely spectacular to see these little toads. Because they were golden and they were just like fluorescent on the forest floor. And by the time my daughters were the age that I was when I discovered these little toads and fell in love, totally in love with nature, I wanted to take them there so that I wanted to make sure that my daughters would also fall in love with nature. And they had gone extinct. They had gone extinct. And when I asked scientists why, this was 1989, they said, we don't actually know, but we think there's something happening with the temperature of the forest floor, and amphibians have very, very tender skin, and we think the temperature changes has killed the species. That was my entry into climate change. Today, we know that the golden toad in Costa Rica, in Monteverde, was the first species that ever went extinct because of climate change. We didn't know that at the time, but today we know that. So, Zainab, I was distraught because I thought, wait, hold on. So my parents, these, incredible political leaders, abolishing the army, fighting for democracy, social justice, they gave me a country and a planet that was better than what they had inherited because they did so much good. So now I am giving my children a country and a planet that is diminished and that is severely threatened. I just thought that doesn't fall within the terms of reference of motherhood. And that's when I decided to devote myself to climate change. I went, no way. I, as a responsible adult, as a mother of two little girls, I have to devote my life to rescuing whatever's left to be rescued so that they can enjoy nature, so that they can enjoy quality of life, and so that everyone, all children of that generation and further generations, not just my two daughters, they represent for me the future. So my dedication in life is to do as much as I can to enhance the probability, because there's never ever any guarantee, but the probability that future generations will be able to live a life that is a thriving life on this planet together with all of the other species.
I want to talk about the role of women because you mentioned that very clearly in your book. You mentioned the impact of your own being a mother and motherhood. Um, and particularly, you mentioned in the book that various institutions take stronger climate actions if they are led by women or have a higher proportion of women in decision making roles. Why do you think that is?
Well, much has been written about this, right? And much has been studied about it. So, what we know is that in general, although there are obviously many exceptions on the part of both men and women, but in general, women tend to, and it's a tendency, it's not a given, to be more longer term thinkers. When you think about how we evolved as human population, men were there to go and kill the lion that is threatening you at the cave door, or to go and do the hunting. And women were more dedicated to the gathering of seeds and fruit, and eventually, after the agricultural revolution, very much involved in planting. And so that is a longer term framework. Plus, I do think that being a mother forces you to think much more in longer terms. Another general difference that, as I say, has many, many exceptions, another general difference is that we tend to be more collaborative with each other. We tend to like to work with other women. If it's, going down to the river and doing the laundry together and singing and washing clothes together, or if it's going out to the fields together, or tending to each other's children. We do tend to do a lot of things together, both from an evolutionary perspective as well as now. And it doesn't always work. Of course, women do fight with each other, so let's not, make us into little angels. But in general, we kind of like to work with each other more, and collaboration is clearly important for this whole climate action. So out of both of those traits, let's say general traits, and there are of course many men who have those traits as well. But those I think are the two preponderant traits that put us in a good position to think about climate, because there's no doubt that climate has to be thought of as a long-term issue and as a collaborative challenge. There's no doubt about that.
Before we end, and we have a couple of moments, I promise, and I'm very grateful for this time and for the conversation. I want to talk just a little bit about, go back about the economic aspect of it, because you do talk about the need to shift from energy extraction to harvesting and from dominance to cooperation. But then you can argue that extraction built our modern capitalism. Is this transition compatible with our current economic model?
Yes, it better be, is what I'm saying. It better be. I mean, the if our economic model, let's just call it capitalism without shying away from the word, if capitalism continues to be based on extraction, then it is not compatible with the better world that we need to create. But I don't think that capitalism necessarily needs to be based on extraction. So Katherine Hayhoe, for example, in her Donut Economics, presents a very interesting model in which we are still in a modern society with monetary values, with market mechanisms, but they're based much more on more egalitarian, let's say, and certainly much more nature-based, a much deeper understanding of value, where value is values based and not just extractive. And it's just a question of, when did we decide that the only value that we attach to something is its extractive value? That was a decision that we took. Now, if we actually examine that and go like, wait a second, what if the value that we attach to something is the value and the level of its reciprocity potential? Now we have a completely different set, right? A completely different set of measurement and of metrics. And hence, we can continue let's call it a market system, but that is actually much more based on reciprocity rather than on extraction. So I would be nervous, honestly, about saying, okay, we actually have to throw capitalism out the door and reinvent something else. Here's my problem with that. It's not that I'm completely opposed to it, is I don't think we have the time for it. That's my problem. We don't have time to throw capitalism out the door and reinvent something else, because it's going to take too much time. And we know that we're losing species every day. So for me, it's more of an evolution rather than a revolution. It's an evolution of our economic model that does integrate nature and humans, other humans, in a much more reciprocal relationship than what we have now.
Now, to this point, so you call yourself a market enthusiast. I say this, the point you just made reinforces that. You also said that you think that carbon offsetting have developed a bad reputation. Can you explain why?
Well, I was very involved in the design of the original international carbon market under the Kyoto Protocol and under the carbon market that was called the Clean Development Mechanism. And I really very much regret that when we moved to the Kyoto Protocol, to the Paris Agreement, as being the legal agreement under the Climate Convention, I very much regret that parties decided to not take over, inherit, and apply the carbon market to a different set of circumstances that are given in the Paris Agreement. And the reason they did that is because they saw that there had been some abuse and some gaming of the carbon market. And then they decided to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't believe in throwing babies out the window. I believe in maybe throwing the water out, but keeping the baby and giving the baby, a different context. So my wish would have been that we would have said, okay, how do we reform the carbon market? Because coming from a developing country, I saw the benefits of the carbon market for developing countries, for really being the economic and financial input that was necessary for many projects that wouldn't get off the ground, that haven't gotten off the ground without the injection of carbon, of the value of carbon reductions. So I think it is one way, not the only. It is one way of strengthening the financial flows from the north to the south in order to help the south decarbonize in a more accelerated fashion. For me, many people interpret it as something that is not fair and not just for the south. I happen to think that it is a fair exchange, that we provide decarbonizing services because we can, and that we get paid for it. I happen to think that that's fair, and I happen to think that that's good. It's a mutual good for both North and South. That's my opinion. Sadly, that was not the predominant opinion, but I still hold the little candle of hope that now that Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, which refers to carbon markets, has substantially been decided in many of its details, I really hold the candle of hope that parties will sit down and define another set of rules for the carbon market, because it's necessary.
Last but not least, what keeps you optimistic, or what brings you optimism in this peculiar moment of time and history that we are living in?
What keeps me optimistic is certainly, all of the market mechanisms market forces that we've talked about the fact that, that technologies keep dropping in price and increasing in efficiency and performance. But also what keeps me optimistic is, Zainab, this is going to sound really strange, but I've been working on this issue for 45 years. 45 years ago, I used to know almost every single person who was working on climate change because there was only 100 of us or 200. Today, what I think is so exciting is I don't know the climate community. That's such good news because there are thousands, if not millions of people in every single country, mostly young people, that are using their ingenuity, their creativity, their gritty conviction to come up with more and more and more solutions that I would never have thought of. And so the fact that I can no longer map the climate community, the fact that it is mapless by now, is brilliant. Thank heavens. Thank heavens. How exciting that there are. And I keep on reading about more and more and more solutions that are coming, especially from developing countries, from what I call kids. Kids are, in their 20s, 30s, even people in their 40s are kids to me still, right? All of that brain power being devoted to let's figure out more and more solutions. And the breadth of those solutions is 100 times what it was 45 years ago. So I'm just so excited that there is this incredible momentum and that people are really excited about finding and developing and applying these solutions and in getting market penetration and market standing. I just think it's so exciting. So that gives me a lot of optimism. Not knowing the full breadth and depth of climate solutions is what makes me incredibly optimistic, because if I knew it, it would be too reduced.
Wow. Wow. I mean, the triumph, this is about the triumph of hope and optimism and even love over fear and despair. Truly, you embody that. Thank you. It's truly an honor and really appreciate you. Just walked us through the whole journey and thank you so much. I'm grateful.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the honor of opening with the first episode. Wow. It's quite an honor.
It's
Thank
our
you so much.
honor.